We were putting together a video on Tennessee, the standard material, the Civil War battlefields, the national parks, the music history, when we found something that didn't fit the list. It was a name on an older map, a note in an archaeological record, a reference to a stone enclosure in Coffee County that settlers in the 1800s couldn't explain, so they blamed the lost tribe of Israel. That stopped us. We kept pulling the thread. One site led to another, and another after that. A sacred cave where Benny Goodman once played for dancers, a mound complex 30 minutes from Nashville that you cannot visit without a ranger escort, an entire river valley the government deliberately drowned. 15 places later, here is what we found. We didn't expect to find a village whose name became the name of a state, sitting at the bottom of a reservoir. But that is number one. Stay with us. If this is the kind of thing you follow, subscribe. There is always another thread to pull. Today we are counting down 15 ancient sites in Tennessee that still don't make sense. Number 15. The Old Stone Fort, Coffee County, Tennessee. The name is wrong. It was never a fort. Nobody has ever found a single weapon inside it, or the remains of a meal, or evidence that anyone slept there. What they found is a stone and earth enclosure stretching about 4,600 feet around a river promontory. 50 acres of carefully constructed space, that is, as far as the archaeological record goes. Completely empty. Two different cultures built this. The McFarland people started around the 1st century CE. The Owl Hollow people finished it roughly 400 or 500 years later. That means generations of people were adding to a wall that none of them would live to see completed, enclosing a space nobody seems to have used for anything practical. Here's the detail that stopped us. There is one opening in that wall. It faces the sunrise at the summer solstice. That's it. No burials, no food stores, no trash pits. Just the wall, the opening, and the sun. Early settlers blamed Spanish conquistadors, Norse explorers, the lost tribe of Israel. The actual explanation, that a community spent 4 centuries building a sacred void, was harder for them to accept. You can walk the 1.4-mile trail today. The waterfalls are free. Number 14. Sellars Farm, Wilson County, near Lebanon. In 1939, a tenant farmer working a field in Middle Tennessee turned up something he didn't expect. A stone figure, then another. By the time archaeologists got involved, 4 painted stone statues had come out of the same ground. Figures carved from siltstone around 700 years ago, buried face up without explanation. These aren't rough carvings. They are, according to the archaeological record, among the finest examples of pre-Columbian sculpture north of Mexico. One of them, a kneeling man 18.5 inches tall, was featured in Time magazine in 1941. He appeared on a U.S. postage stamp in 2004. In 2014, he became Tennessee's official state artifact. Here's what nobody has answered. Why were they buried at all? The community that made them, a fortified Mississippian town of over 100 houses, collapsed around AD 1400. Before or during that collapse, someone carefully placed 4 irreplaceable objects in the earth and left them there. The statues are at the McClung Museum in Knoxville now. The field where they were found is a free walking trail off I-40. The mound is still there, quiet, in the trees. Number 13. Castalian Springs, Sumner County. This one took a research detour to understand properly. The site is a Mississippian mound center about 7 miles east of Gallatin. 4 earthen mounds arranged around a central plaza, occupied for roughly 350 years beginning around AD 1050. That's not unusual for Middle Tennessee. What is unusual is what the archaeologists at Middle Tennessee State University found when they started measuring things. They spent a decade observing the site at solstices and equinoxes. What they documented is that every major mound and earthwork at Castalian Springs follows a precise solar grid, aligned to the movements of the sun across the year. Every structure except one. The town appears to have been designed around the sky. That's interesting, but here's the part that made us pause. During the 350-year period this town was occupied, the shadow of a total solar eclipse passed directly over this site 8 separate times. Archaeologists cannot test what that meant to the people who lived here, but they noted and suggest it may have shaped the community's history in ways we can't fully reconstruct. The site was abandoned around AD 1400. 3.5 centuries later, a stagecoach inn called Wynwood was built on the property. When archaeologists tested the soil beneath it in 2017, they found that Wynwood, still standing, the largest log structure in Tennessee, had been built directly on top of one of the ancient mounds. The healing resort sat on an 800-year-old earthwork the whole time. Nobody knew. The mound is still there underneath. Free tours are available through the Bledsoe's Lick Historical Association. Number 12. Dunbar Cave, Montgomery County, Clarksville. 8 miles long, 56 degrees year-round, used continuously since at least 10,000 BCE. Dunbar Cave is the largest known cave on the western highland ridge of Tennessee, and it holds one of the more layered archaeological records in the state. Here's the detail that stopped us cold on this one. Around the 14th century CE, Mississippian people entered the cave carrying torches made of bundled river cane. They went past the point where any natural light reaches, the section that archaeologists call the dark zone, and on the walls there in absolute darkness, they painted and carved more than 30 images. Celestial symbols, figures of the middle world and the underworld, at least one depiction of a supernatural warrior. They weren't decorating. The Mississippians understood this cave as a literal portal to the underworld, the third layer of a three-tiered cosmos. The darkness wasn't incidental. The darkness was the point. Those images were discovered in January 2005. They were announced to the public in July 2006. And when you go today on a guided tour, the guide switches from a standard flashlight to a red-filtered beam at the location of the art. Because under white light, the markings are nearly invisible. Photography isn't permitted. The symbols are still considered sacred by modern indigenous communities. In 1931, a group of Clarksville businessmen converted the cave entrance into a dance hall. Glenn Miller and Benny Goodman both played there. Roy Acuff bought the property in 1948. The state acquired it in 1973. Tours run May through September. Number 11. Chucalissa, Memphis, 20 minutes from Graceland, on a Mississippi River bluff, inside T.O. Fuller State Park. There is a fully excavated Mississippian city. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1994. The University of Memphis has operated it as a research and museum site since 1962. Admission is about $5 or $6. The name comes from a Chickasaw word meaning abandoned house. Archaeologists gave it that name because when they arrived it was empty, and apparently had been for a long time. The Chickasaw who found it before them couldn't explain it either. The community here occupied this bluff from around AD 1000 to 1550. They left, returned, left again, returned, and then sometime around 1550, possibly as European diseases began moving inland. They left for the last time. When CCC workers started digging for a recreational lake in 1938, they found the mounds still intact beneath the grass. The site has been a Mississippian city, a cotton plantation, a segregated public park, and a university archaeological lab, all in the same place. Most people in Memphis have never heard of it. Number 10. Mound Bottom, Cheatham County, 30 minutes west of Nashville, inside a horseshoe bend of the Harpeth River. There is a Mississippian period city that most Nashvillians have never seen and cannot visit without a ranger escort. The access road is, and this is not an exaggeration, almost completely hidden. There is no sign. There is no parking lot, just a wide spot in the road off Cedar Hill Road, and a trail that leads to 12 earthen platform mounds arranged around a 7-acre central plaza occupied from around 8950 to 1350. The artifacts found here suggest Mound Bottom wasn't built by a local community that grew organically. The evidence points to outsiders, people who arrived from the American Bottom in what is now Missouri and Illinois, likely connected in some way to Cahokia, the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. They came to the Harpeth River Bend and built what became the political capital of the Middle Cumberland Mississippian culture. Here's the detail that stopped us. On a limestone bluff directly above the mound complex, someone carved a stone mace into the rock face around 800 years ago. The mace was the symbol of Mississippian political authority. It is still there, on the cliff, looking down at the plaza below, essentially a signature left in stone by the people who ruled this valley. Around AD 1350, the system collapsed. A multi-generational drought appears in the evidence. By AD 1425, the entire Middle Cumberland Mississippian civilization had disappeared from the archaeological record. You can arrange a ranger tour through Harpeth River State Park. The site is closed to independent visitors because what's left is too fragile and too rare to leave unprotected. Number 9. Shiloh Indian Mounds, Hardin County. Most people who visit Shiloh National Military Park are there for the Civil War battlefield. The two-day Battle of Shiloh in April 1862 left roughly 3,500 soldiers dead and reshaped the Western theater of the war. The monuments, the sunken road, the National Cemetery. That's what people come for. About a mile from the visitor center, past stops 19 and 20 on the self-guided driving tour, there is a separate kiosk and a short trail that almost no one follows. What it leads to is a 45-acre Mississippian city, 8 earthen mounds and the foundations of nearly 100 houses, enclosed within a palisade 3,000 feet long, occupied from around AD 1000 to 1450. The site has never been plowed. That is almost unknown for Mississippian sites east of the Mississippi. The mounds retain their original pyramidal shapes. Surface remains of houses are still visible in the ground. The people who built this belonged to what archaeologists call the Shiloh chiefdom. We don't know what they called themselves. They received a diplomatic gift from Cahokia, a stone pipe shaped like a kneeling man, uncovered in a 1934 excavation, and then they vanished from the record around AD 1450, more than a century before European contact. Here's what the Civil War added. One of the platform mounds, Mound F, was used as a mass burial site for Union soldiers killed in the April 1862 battle. Soldiers dug into an 800-year-old Native American earthwork without knowing what it was. The mound now holds 2 civilizations. Separated by 8 centuries, the trail is free, open at dawn, and almost always empty. If you are following this with us, drop a like. It helps more people find these stories. And let us know in the comments if any of these places ring a bell. Sometimes our viewers have been there, sometimes they grew up there. We read everything. Number 8. Moccasin Bend, Hamilton County, Chattanooga. The National Park Service describes Moccasin Bend as one of the most unique units in the entire National Park Service system, and their reason is straightforward. This river bend has been continuously occupied for approximately 12,000 years. That is the longest documented habitation record in Tennessee. Paleo-Indian hunters around 10,000 BCE. Archaic camps, woodland villages. Archaeologists have found evidence of multiple separate communities from that period alone. Mississippian mound builders, possibly Spanish explorers in the 1500s. Cherokee, Civil War armies, escaped slaves on the Underground Railroad. Industrial-era factory workers, today a wastewater treatment plant and a golf course share the same ground. The Bend is part of the Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park now. There are walking trails along the river. The archaeological sites aren't excavated. They're underfoot throughout. And Lookout Mountain, directly above, gives you a view of the entire peninsula from the sky, wrapped on 3 sides by the Tennessee River. 12,000 years of civilization, visible in one loop of a river. Most visitors to Chattanooga don't know it's there. Number 7. Hiwassee Island, Meigs County. This island sits at the confluence of the Hiwassee and Tennessee rivers, about 35 miles northeast of Chattanooga. Before TVA created Chickamauga Reservoir in 1940, it was 781 acres. Now it's about 400 above the waterline. The rest, including a significant portion of the archaeological site, is submerged. What the island holds is a layered record stretching across roughly 1,000 years. Early surveys in 1885 and again in 1913 and 1919 identified as many as 24 mounds. AWPA excavation in 1937 to 1939 documented 4 distinct cultural phases: woodland, early Mississippian, late Mississippian, and historic Cherokee. 17 Native American tribes currently claim cultural connections to this island. In the early 19th century, the Cherokee village here was led by Chief John Jolly. Sam Houston lived on the island for approximately 3 years during that period, after his first marriage collapsed and he resigned as governor of Tennessee. He reportedly dressed in Cherokee clothing, adopted Cherokee customs, and was formally adopted into the tribe. The mounds he walked past every day are still there, partially underwater. In 2016, a TVA geophysical survey identified up to 7 Mississippian Palisade features still intact below the surface. The site retains more than previously known. It is not open for casual visits. It is managed as a wildlife area, but it draws tens of thousands of birds during migration. At some point, someone grew corn on the island to attract Canada geese, and ended up with 20,000 sandhill cranes. The history is underneath. Most people go for the birds. Number 6. Pinson Mounds, Madison County, about 10 miles southeast of Jackson, Tennessee, on a flat upland plateau above the Forked Deer River, is the largest group of middle woodland mounds in the United States. At least 17 confirmed mounds across roughly 400 acres, built from around 200 BCE to 400 CE. The site has a museum, 5 miles of trails, a disc golf course, and an annual festival. It is genuinely undervisited. The centerpiece is Sellars' Mound, 72 feet tall, the second highest surviving prehistoric mound in the country. Its four corners are precisely aligned to the four cardinal directions. Mound 29, in the eastern section, aligns with Sellars' mound in the direction of the equinox sunrise. Mound 28 aligns with it at the summer solstice. The whole complex appears to have been laid out around astronomical observation. One estimate puts the volume of Earth in Sellars Mound alone at roughly 60,500 cubic meters, built one basket at a time, possibly over more than a century, by people who traveled here from as far away as Georgia and Louisiana. The site has more in common architecturally with the Ohio Hopewell culture, centered 600 miles north, than with local traditions. Something connected these communities across a vast distance, for purposes we haven't fully recovered. In 1820, a land speculator named Joel Pinson surveyed the area, and the complex was named after him. That's how it entered the record. Before that, it had been there for 2,000 years. Here's the burial that stopped us. In the 1980s, excavators opened the twin mounds and found 3 men interred with 8 young women surrounding them in a circle, every one of them wearing a headdress and copper jewelry. Nobody has explained what that gathering was. Number 5. Long Island of the Holston, Sullivan County, Kingsport. This 4-mile river island was Tennessee's first National Historic Landmark, designated in 1960. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians considers it one of their 3 most sacred cultural sites. Henry Timberlake's 1762 map shows it as a landmark on the route through the Overhill Cherokee territory. Thousands of settlers passed through it on the way to Kentucky and Middle Tennessee. The Treaty of Long Island, signed here in 1776, was one of the documents that defined the early western boundary of the United States. On July 4, 1777, the first 4th of July celebration west of the Appalachian Mountains was held on this island. The Cherokee held onto Long Island longer than almost any other land in East Tennessee. They ceded the surrounding territory piece by piece. Over decades, the island itself, the specific ground they considered sacred, they kept. Until 1806, when the U.S. government purchased it from them. Secretary of War Henry Dearborn handled the transaction. The price paid for one of the most sacred sites in Cherokee religion is not in the public record. In 1976, Kingsport returned 3.61 acres of the island to the Eastern Band. That parcel is still there, accessible near the Riverfront Park swinging bridge. The eastern portion of the island is now dominated by Eastman Chemical Company, one of the largest chemical manufacturers in the United States. The NPS recommended delisting it as a National Historic Landmark in 1996 due to the loss of historic integrity. It retained the designation. Most people who drive across the bridge to get to work have no idea what they're crossing. Number 4. Citico, Monroe County. In October 1567, a Spanish explorer named Juan Pardo arrived at a Mississippian village known as Sitapo, on the banks of the Little Tennessee River. That may be one of the earliest documented European contacts in what is now Tennessee. The Cherokee later absorbed the site, and the name. Because the Cherokee language has no bilabial stop, no P sound, Sitapo became Citigu, and then Citico. The name of the original people survived for 4 centuries filtered through a different language. It was still in use in 1979 when the water covered everything. Citico became the largest of the Overhill Cherokee towns, an estimated 1,000 people by the mid-18th century, with 204 warriors, the most of any Overhill community, reported by Captain Henry Timberlake in 1761. A Smithsonian survey in the 1880s found 8 mounds, including a temple mound with at least 91 burials. Colonial forces burned the town in 1776. The community rebuilt. The town survived in 1979. The Tennessee Valley Authority closed Tellico Dam. 3 Cherokee individuals and 2 Cherokee bands filed suit. Sequoia v. Tennessee Valley Authority, arguing that flooding their sacred homeland violated their religious freedoms. The Supreme Court ruled against them. The site is now under Tellico Lake. In drought years, archaeological features occasionally become visible at the shoreline. Otherwise, the lake is calm, and the boats move across it without ceremony. The name Sitapo, carried forward through 4 centuries in 2 languages, is gone now too. The water covered it all on November 29, 1979. Number 3. Toqua, Monroe County. The name means place of a mythic great fish. The site itself is under Tellico Lake, about 2 miles south of Honore on US 411. There are boats on the water in summer and a marina on the shore. Nothing about it suggests what's underneath. The Mississippian people who first built here did something unusual with their main mound. They built it in 16 distinct stages, which means that each generation of residents didn't modify the existing structure. They buried it. They laid new earth over the previous summit, enclosing whatever had been there, and started again. 12 of those 16 construction stages had structures built on their summits before they were covered. The accumulation of buried histories is, quite literally, inside the mound. Colonial forces burned Toqua in 1776. The community rebuilt. They burned it again in 1780. The community rebuilt. They burned it a third time in 1788. The community rebuilt. By 1797, when Duke Louis-Philippe of France visited, he was in exile from the Revolution, wandering the American interior. He recorded that the town had only 8 to 10 houses left. His brother made a drawing of it. That sketch is the only known contemporary image of a living 18th century Cherokee town anywhere in the world. In the 1930s, a treasure hunter named George Barnes dug into the Toqua site looking for objects to sell. He found hundreds of human bones and discarded most of them. Toqua was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1978. It was submerged the following year. The lake is calm. The drawings are in archives. Number 2. Tanasi, Monroe County. This is where the name comes from. The village of Tanasi, also written Tanasi, Tennessee, Tunasi, served as the de facto capital of the Overhill Cherokee from at least 1721 until 1730. Colonial maps show it. Traders used it as a reference point. South Carolina Governor James Glenn began spelling the name Tennessee in the 1750s. By 1796, when the state was formally named, the spelling had settled. The word Tennessee is Tanasi. In 1730, a British adventurer named Alexander Cumming arrived at the village and staged an elaborate ceremony to crown a rival chief as Emperor of the Cherokee. What he wanted in exchange was the crown of Tanasi, a symbolic headdress described as resembling a wig made of dyed possum hair, which he intended to present to King George II. He got it. He took it to England along with a party of Cherokee representatives. Tanasi's influence shifted after that to the adjacent town of Chota, and then the colonial pressure that had been building for a century caught up with everything. Between 1969 and 1974, University of Tennessee archaeologists excavated the Chota-Tanasi sites, knowing the TVA was going to flood them. They recovered 783 features, the layouts of 31 structures, and 91 burials. In 1979, the Cherokee sued to stop the flooding. The Supreme Court ruled against them. A monument stands on the bank above where Tanasi was. It marks the site and notes that the village gave the state its name. The village has been under the water for 47 years. The monument stands in near complete silence most mornings. The state named itself after a city it helped drown. Number 1. The Little Tennessee River Valley. There is a spot off Highway 455, about 7 miles southeast of Monroe, where a gravel pullout appears on the right side of the road without warning. There is no formal parking area. There are no information boards visible from the car. If you stop and walk toward the water, you find a small monument at the edge of Tellico Lake. Behind you, the Appalachian foothills rise in every direction. The lake is still and clear and perfectly ordinary looking. In the early morning, mist rises off the water. 30 feet below the surface, there is a Cherokee capital. The Little Tennessee River Valley had been continuously occupied for approximately 10,000 years when the Tennessee Valley Authority announced in 1967 that it was going to build a dam. The Smithsonian had surveyed the valley in the 1880s and called it undoubtedly the most interesting archaeological section in the entire Appalachian District. By the time TVA announced the Tellico project, the valley still held the major Overhill Cherokee towns: Tanasi, Chota, Toqua, Citico, Tamatli, Mealiquo, Tuskegee, the village whose name became the name of the state, the village where the Cherokee were burned out, rebuilt, burned again, and held on for 200 years, the valley where the Cherokee signed treaty after treaty while slowly losing everything except this. Archaeologists spent 12 years excavating frantically before the water came. Over 1 million artifacts were recovered. University of Tennessee teams documented 783 features and 91 burials at Chota alone. Some of what they found is at the McClung Museum in Knoxville. Some is at the Sequoia Birthplace Museum in Vonore. The sites themselves, all of them, are gone. In 1979, 3 Cherokee individuals and 2 Cherokee bands filed suit to stop the flooding. Sequoia v. Tennessee Valley Authority went to the United States Supreme Court. The Cherokee argued that flooding these sites violated their religious freedoms. The Supreme Court ruled against them. On November 29, 1979, the gates closed. The TVA's original plan called for a city of 42,000 people on the new lakeshore. They named it Timberlake, after Henry Timberlake, the colonial journalist who had visited the Cherokee towns the dam destroyed. The city was never built. What was built instead was a retirement golf community of 8,000 residents called Tellico Village. The monument at the edge of the water is managed by the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. The monuments at Chota and Tanasi stand in near complete silence most mornings. Most people who drive Highway 455 don't stop. There are more threads to pull. This one just doesn't end where you'd expect it to. There are more threads. There always are in Tennessee. If we had to name a personal favorite, it's number 2, Tanasi. Not because of the dam, but because of that name. A colonial map misspelling that became a state. That kind of historical accident carried forward without anyone noticing is the thing we keep looking for. Which one surprised you? Which thread should we follow next? Subscribe, and we'll keep going.